It's just a way to offer a permission structure to Israel's violence against the Palestinians, both historically and currently happening. Communism. You like the weekend? Thank a union for that. Thank some communists for that. Okay. What is this 7-year sub? I know how to link. Please don't ban. Do you just not want this one?
Do you think Israel has the right to defend itself?
What is
Everyone who isn't a piece of shit has been asked this question at some point. You've probably been asked it at some point, or you're asking it right now in the comment section. It's a very handy...
And you get a mention? Really? Don't you love Israel? No politique here. No politique. No politique. No politique. Israel number one. Why you not love Israel? Why you not love Israel? Oh, antisemitism. Oh, why you not love Israel? Why you not love Israel?
A rhetorical tool for the type of dweeb who wants to sweep Israel's barbarism under the rug. On the surface, seems like a pretty reasonable question, doesn't it? What kind of jerk doesn't want people to defend themselves? A jerk, I wager. Are you some kind of jerk? Prove you're not a jerk. Look a little closer and I think you'll see the game being played. The question takes for granted that whatever action you were criticizing Israel for was necessarily defensive in some capacity. Now, of course, they don't say that, because if they did, you'd be able to actually argue that point. They simply leave it implied and unspoken, so there's nothing to argue. You're left with a choice. You can either, 1, accept the dishonest framing, concede that Israeli violence is defensive and necessary, thereby granting anything Israel does, no matter how heinous, a certain moral legitimacy, or 2, you can attempt to dispute the framing, thereby handing them the opportunity to present you as simply not caring about the safety of Israelis. Using this method, any shithead can sidestep criticism of Israel for anything. Present whatever the hell they want as more or less the only alternative to the eradication of Israel and every citizen therein. It becomes a high-stakes, zero-sum struggle for survival where the belligerent occupying force is somehow always implied to be on the back foot, always outnumbered, outgunned, and on the verge of total destruction. The perpetual underdog, plucky little Israel. Now, I've always recognized this as a gotcha question. I'm sure you do too. It's pretty obviously bad faith. Still, never really occurred to me until I read this book, The 100 Years' War in Palestine by Rashid Khalidi, particularly the last chapter, which sums up the methods that Khalidi believes have been historically successful in advancing the Palestinian cause, that I realized I've never really had a helpful rebuttal to this question. When pressed, I would usually give some pithy soundbite, something like, the state of Israel is illegitimate, or states don't have rights. People do. Because I knew enough, not to engage seriously with this bad faith line of argumentation. I just wanted to shut it down. But that's kind of a problem, isn't it? Because it's not really convincing. Israeli propaganda has managed to portray them as the victims of Arab aggression, that they are simply responding to unprovoked attacks motivated by nothing but primordial anti-Semitism. They've managed to parlay...
Lol, that's you? Wait, what? I know all of the... First of all, I know all of the fucking colonial barbarism Israel has utilized. It's a little bit difficult to fucking engage with Hasbaris on those virtues in a short answer format.
Western Islamophobia in order to portray Palestinians, or anyone who could be confused for a Palestinian, or anyone who feels the slightest sympathy for Palestinians as a terrorist.
That's why I think the greatest counter is, does Nazi Germany have a right to exist? Does apartheid South Africa have a right to exist? That is the most effective and shortest counter of all time. And I think that's the best possible counter that you can engage with.
Monster person who wants to do terrorism because they're just ontologically evil. That is, of course, what historians call racist hogwash. It's like Colonizer 101 to portray the colonized people as savage, aggressive barbarians being violent to you for no reason. It's the same kind of language that my ancestors would have used to justify their genocidal colonization of this continent, or chattel slavery. I say would have because obviously my ancestors are largely dead, but there are still people saying stuff like that, obviously. And I think you would recognize that as wrong there, right? Like, it's about as wrong as a thing can be. It just doesn't matter for the argument, because that all of that is in the realm of facts and material analysis. You're responding to a spooky boogeyman with statistics and history lessons and critical theory, and it's okay, but people are afraid. That's not making them unafraid. It's very hard once people have become afraid to make them unafraid. And if enough people perceive this racist hogwash to be true, waving away the fear which results from that false belief Gonna make you look like a real asshole. When you're not an asshole, it's them with the hogwash. They're the ones not washing their hogs. Getting into the weeds of what a state is, when, if ever, one is legitimate, whether or not states can possess rights, and if so, what those rights might be, or any parallels to historical events that the general public likely doesn't know much about, don't really make anyone feel better about the manufactured fear of limitless Arab hostility that Zionists have carefully cultivated. It will be received as simply dodging the question. Rightfully so, because we are dodging the question. It's not a good faith question. We're trying to avoid answering it for that reason. But there actually is a very simple, very effective answer to this question. Do I think Israel has a right to defend itself? Sure.
No.
It's just not what they're doing. So it's not relevant. That addresses the root problem with the premise of this question, right? Israeli occupation is the aggressive force in this conflict, and always has been. Any violence that Palestinian resistance has engaged in, whether or not one views it as tactically useful or even morally justifiable from our comfortable little computer chairs oceans away, must be understood within the greater context of an exponentially more violent Israeli occupation. Palestinians, by and large, are not violent. Any violence that Palestinian resistance engages in is not the result of some sort of incidental anti-Semitism unrelated to any oppression they might face from Israeli occupation. It is a response to over a century's worth of deliberate ethnic cleansing and resistance to a supremacist movement, Zionism, which seeks to wipe them and their culture off of the face of the earth. And it always has, and it always will until it is dismantled and destroyed, like all supremacist movements must be. For decades, Zionists insisted, often referring to the state's Declaration of Independence, that Israel could be, and was both, Jewish and democratic. As the contradictions inherent in this formulation grew ever more apparent, some Israeli leaders admitted, indeed even declared it with pride, that if they were forced to choose, the Jewish aspect would take precedence. In July 2018, the Knesset codified the choice in constitutional law, adopting the Basic Law of the Jewish Nation-State, which institutionalized statutory inequality among Israeli citizens by arrogating the right of national self-determination exclusively to the Jewish people, downgrading the status of Arabic and declaring Jewish settlement a national value, with precedence over other needs. Former Justice Minister Ayelet Shaked, one of the more forthright advocates of Jewish supremacy and a sponsor of the law, had made the case bluntly a few months before the legislation came to a vote. There are places where the character of the State of Israel as a Jewish state must be maintained, and this sometimes comes at the expense of equality. To ask whether Israel has the right to defend itself is kind of like asking whether foxes have the right to defend themselves from chickens. Yeah, I guess. Right? In a hypothetical world where foxes didn't eat chickens, I would be quite critical of chickens who attacked foxes. But we don't live in that world. And I think the chickens have a pretty reasonable fear that if they don't defend themselves, they will be killed and eaten. It is difficult for me to cast judgment on the chickens in this matter. The strategy here is simple: to willfully ignore and obscure the power dynamic between Israeli occupier and Palestinian resistance, to present themselves as oppressed underdogs and Palestinians, or just Arabs writ large when that suits their purposes, as overpoweringly dominant and aggressive for no reason, to muddy the waters so that onlookers internationally, particularly in the West, but particularly in the United
Palestinians are both simultaneously weak and also demonic entities that, control the international banking system, and also, of course, the media. Palestinians have their tentacle in Israeli society. Palestinians are responsible for all of the evils.
States get the impression that Israel is either the less violent party in this conflict, which it demonstrably isn't, or failing that all parties are equally violent in this conflict, which they...
The Palestinians lie about their oppression, Pallywood, Holocaust denial. It's just, I said this on October 7, like the idea that Israel would ever point the finger of Nazism in the direction of Hamas or the Palestinians as a whole is so insane, because you're just reminding people the historic atrocities that the Nazis engaged in. And I think eventually people will recognize that Israel is infinitely closer to a Nazi-style form of governance, and Israel's violence will be reflected on poorly in the same ways that we now look back with 2020 vision of hindsight at the Nazi Holocaust. Same with ISIS. Hamas is ISIS. Remember the hashtag Israel tried to make happen after October 7? Hamas is ISIS. Like, Israel is far closer to ISIS than Hamas ever was and ever could be. That's not even a thing. Same with Nazis.
Demonstrably are not. That it's this intractable conflict with no discernible solution. There's just nothing that would appease these people. That whatever violence Israel trades in was always inevitable because there's no way to make peace. They have no partner in the peace process, don't you know? It's violence or nothing. And it's better to do the violence than have the violence done to you, right? And just like, think about that for a second. Does that make sense to you? Like on a brass tacks, common sense level, does it make sense? Because on one side, we have a nuclear power, though they won't admit it and are allowed not to admit it for some reason, supported, funded, armed, and protected by, at various points in its history up to the present day, the most powerful empires the planet has ever seen. A country with the 12th biggest military budget on the planet and the second highest military budget to GDP ratio, and that's not even factoring in the absurd level of foreign aid given to it by the aforementioned empires, both financially and with just direct gifts of state-of-the-art weapons and military tech. And on the other side, we have guerrilla militants and children throwing rocks at tanks and grieving mothers on TikTok. And we have students. The students are in other countries, but they're holding signs, and sometimes the signs are rude. Does that strike you as a balanced conflict? Do you think both parties in that conflict have comparable ability to wipe out the other? Or does it seem like one party has all of the material power in that situation? Like, just put aside for a moment your thoughts on which side has the moral high ground and really ask yourself, who is more powerful here? That's why it really chaps me when the extermination in Gaza is called a war. It's not a war. It's a military campaign, yes, but it's one waged almost exclusively against the civilian population of an occupied territory, half of whom are children. Non-combatants are routinely targeted and deliberately killed, including children, including aid workers, and pregnant women and journalists. It's just a matter of course. That's not a war. War is between two warring parties. Both sides are fighting and can defend themselves. This is not that. Just like it wouldn't be a fight if you were to strike a baby in its crib. That's not how you'd describe that. And while this...
I mean, that's how I would describe how Israel conducts its quote-unquote war, though, directly. And they don't even like punch the baby in the crib. They punch it with a fucking 2,000-pound munition that they got from America. And you're fucking anti-Semitic if you don't think Israel deserves that munition to use on the baby in the crib. You're also doubly anti-Semitic if you think that Israel was not justified in blowing up that baby's crib.
Violence has certainly escalated since October 7th, 2024. It has always been the case that Israel engaged in disproportionately violent tactics. Even during peacetime, the IDF regularly engages in vulgar displays of violent domination to thin out resistance, which it colorfully refers to as mowing the lawn. Isn't that cute? This euphemism, mowing the lawn, came into popularity based on a speech given by then Israeli Minister of Education Naftali Bennett in September of 2018 at a counterterrorism conference. Why the Minister of Education is speaking at a counterterrorism conference eludes me. Bennett said, "In our neighborhood, if you do not mow the lawn mows you." I can think of no clearer articulation of the Zionist attitude. Everything is a threat, and every threat justifies just whatever they wanted to do in the first place. In order for him to arrive at this metaphor, he had to claim that one's front lawn poses a threat. If you don't mow it, it'll mow you. No, it wouldn't. A lawn cannot mow you. That's simply not what lawns do. Is that why you mow your lawn? Because you're afraid that left unchecked, the grass would mow you? What? It's an insipid metaphor, but nonetheless, often directly invoked by Israeli officials, politicians, and political commentators, or anyone who advocates for aggressive positions in Israel's relations with Hamas or whomever they'd like to pretend is Hamas at any given moment. And it's also at odds with the plucky little Israel narrative commonly expressed in the West that I described earlier, because it positions Israel and the IDF as the active, in-control party whose preemptive cyclical violence is intended as deliberate suppression. You know, the truth. Because that's how Zionists within Israel talk amongst themselves. Within the metaphor, the occasional bout of preemptive, indiscriminate state violence is simply the cost of maintaining their property. That harm done to Palestinians has about the same moral weight as harm done to blades of grass, and thus one should not be discerning about which Palestinians are killed. They all have to be cut down, after all, or they will cut you down. That's not only a statement of intent to commit the war crime of collective punishment, it also provides justification for the eradication of all civilians and combatants alike, which is also a war crime incidentally. Well, that's not strictly speaking true. That's actually just a broad category of activity which includes all war crimes. But it's not as though the distinction between combatant and non-combatant really matters to the IDF, considering it is their official policy to use disproportionate force to target civilian infrastructure in flagrant violation of international law. And that's not me editorializing, by the way. They use the term disproportionate force. They literally say that. It's called the Tahia Doctrine. It could not be more cut and dry. It is the official stated position of the IDF to use.
I mean, there's a lot of different versions of this where, like, if you just look at that Israeli military doctrine, you're like, this is insane. Hannibal doctrine comes to mind, obviously, or even the Samson option.
What they themselves describe as disproportionate force against civilian infrastructure, thereby targeting whatever civilian population depends on or was itself physically present within that infrastructure. I really can't hammer this point home hard enough. It isn't me saying this. I'm quoting them. This is what they say. This is how they characterize their own actions. And let me just ask, does that sound like the underdog to you? Do they sound like the victims here, the less belligerent party? Do you think a reluctantly violent person would characterize violence as nothing more than a tedious chore which needed to be scheduled in advance and done with mechanical regularity? Do you think a military whose sole intent were to defend itself would use what it itself describes as disproportionate force? Can one even use disproportionate force defensively? Isn't it kind of definitionally aggressive, definitionally escalatory? Do you really believe, in your heart of hearts, do you believe that if one person in an entire village attacks you, that gives you the moral right to kill everyone in that village? Men, women, children, sick people in hospitals. Does that sound like self-defense to you? Should the people having their homes and loved ones destroyed simply accept that? Do they not likewise have a right to defend themselves? Just think about it. Western media is all too happy to obscure the power dynamics at play as well. There's nothing too absurd or too distant from objective reality for them at this point. They'll just say the wildest shit and expect you to swallow it uncritically.
One of the things I saw recently was like, it reminded me of the Onion article. Israel invents new language to refer to Palestinians under the age of 18 as anything but minors, or children as anything but children. And there was an article with the headline like, there was an article that featured the words like, Palestinian men under the age of 18. Israel has killed Palestinian. Oh, it was about New York Times, not Israel. I'm mixing and matching. Sorry. Yeah. Palestinian future adults died. Who knows how?
Because they think you're stupid. They think you're so fucking stupid. While the IDF actively drops bombs on hospitals and refugee camps, CNN and MSNBC will have their little pet propagandists on crying crocodile tears about how scared they felt when children's entertainer Miss Rachel hugged a Palestinian.
Yeah. Israel's military operation, which began after the Hamas-led attack on southern Israel on October 7th, 2023, has killed more than 18,000 Palestinians under the age of 18. Every word besides children used to describe Palestinians under 18 by The Onion. There was one article where it says civilians who had yet to reach their teens. Jesus Christ. Yeah, which is the opposite of former baby IDF soldier slain, ruthlessly murdered inside of his tank. About 2/3 of them did not reach their teenage years. So babies, children, babies, baby children. Yeah. Yeah, tank baby, as opposed to the Israeli tank baby. Former Gerber baby star of Israel, slain unjustifiably and immorally by disgusting monsters. Why you no love Israel? This is former baby, Gerber baby, Gerber baby. Is Israel baby? Former baby.
Palestinian child. That made them feel unsafe, targeted even. Unlike, say, a cruise missile, which is defensive. It's a defensive type of missile. They had to defend themselves from the hospital because there were tunnels underneath, spooky tunnels that they built. And then they lied about building, and they lied about having done all of this, despite the fact that they also think it's morally unimpeachable. Because that's what you do, right? That's what you do, is when you do something that you think is right, and you think it's the right thing to do and the right choice, you lie about it. Makes sense. Makes sense to me. Any criticism of Israel, no matter how measured, or the mere presence in public life of anyone who has made such a criticism, we are told, somehow makes Jews feel unsafe in some unspecified capacity. All Jews, I guess, even the ones who directly say otherwise, even when it's a Jewish person, or indeed hundreds of Jewish people or literal Holocaust survivors speaking. Those Jewish people must be silenced violently if necessary, because otherwise, if we don't silence them with violence, they might feel unsafe. None of these dipshits will try to make the argument that anything being said actually makes Jewish people unsafe, mind you. No, it's just that they might be made to feel unsafe. I feel unsafe when you say that it's...
That was my favorite tweet in the post-Zoran primary victory cycle. It's like, no, the point is, I'm saying, I don't think he's going to be anti-Semitic. The point is, I think he might be. And when I say it, you have to literally respond to it. You have to respond to it, and you have to straight up listen to what I have to say and abide by my hysteria. Okay, thanks, man. Great.
Wrong to blockade an occupied territory, refusing to allow in medical and food aid in order to use starvation and disease as a weapon of war in flagrant violation of the Geneva Convention. I find that triggering, frankly, and I don't want to be insensitive here. I will grant you that it is a problem when people feel unsafe. I don't want to minimize that. That's not nothing. It's just about as close to nothing as anything could reasonably be in this discussion, because, like, you can't specifically complain that you're being made to feel unsafe in order to justify other people actually being made unsafe. Like, I don't think I know how to make that any clearer. Like, it is worse to be unsafe than to feel unsafe, obviously. Do you know what else might make people feel unsafe? If one were to put someone in a refugee camp and then bomb said refugee camp, or like if you were to level an entire city block, or if you were to do all of that and tell people where they should evacuate to and then bomb the place that they evacuated to, do you see how that would create a certain sense of unease? As they lose their grip on the discourse, it's no longer enough for the Zionist that their talking points and feelings are privileged above everyone else's. Now they'll bitch and moan that a counter-argument is even allowed to be expressed, because for once, it is. That anything other than full-throated support of anything Israel does, no matter how violent, is literally terrorism. It should be a criminal offense. It sometimes actually is a criminal offense simply to disagree with them. You should be deported for disagreeing with them. And isn't it so unfair that a major news outlet will allow people to criticize Israel up to and including platforming a literal gamer?
I'm thinking about the New York Times doing a gauzy profile a few weeks ago.
It's really fucked up. Really fucked up.
This gamer, Hasan Piker, who regularly employs awful genocidal rhetoric against Jewish people in the Jewish state.
The man making those defamatory remarks is with the Anti-Defamation League. Irony is dead. I say that it's defamation because I don't think it is correct to say that Hasan Piker
regularly employs awful genocidal rhetoric against Jewish people in the Jewish state.
If it were, I feel like someone would have let Ethan Klein know by now, because it seems to me like he's put a lot of effort into trying to prove that exact point for a few months, and it keeps falling flat on his ass trying to do it, so it seems like there's not a lot of evidence. Try and sue me. Do it, bitch. I'm Canadian. I can say whatever the fuck I want. Go ahead, bitch. I'm not Jewish, so take this with a grain of salt. But I've always thought that the worst form of anti-Semitic rhetoric would be like, I don't know, signaling support for Nazis. Like, for example, if one were to throw up a Sig Heil once or twice, kind of an extreme example, I know, but like if someone were to do that, right, and we're all on the lookout for anti-Semitism, and I think we should be, that's something I would recommend keeping an eye on. And definitely you wouldn't want to defend it or make excuses for it, especially if that person then later went on to like train their AI using a bunch of anti-Semitic dog whistles, and the AI started calling itself Mecha Hitler, and they seemed okay with that. That's something I definitely would want to monitor closely. Unless, of course, for some reason, I didn't actually give a shit about anti-Semitism, but find it to be a useful rhetorical device to silence critics. But I digress. Here I go. Watch me. I'm digressing. This is me digressing. Make no mistake, there is no equivalence here. Despite the constant stream of propaganda blasted at you to convince you otherwise, Israel is, and always has been, the more violent party in this conflict. There is simply no way that one can massage the numbers where they don't maim and kill exponentially more people. It's simply an unavoidable reality if one looks even slightly at the facts. So in order to maintain the illusion that Israel is the victim, like
even the dynamic between anti-Semitism in the West, right, versus Israel's genocide that's currently unfolding. While anti-Semitism is an unacceptable form of bigotry, the reason why we hate anti-Semitism, the reason why we despise it, the reason why we attack anti-Semites is because it sets the stage for genocide. And it has been successfully implemented. The dehumanization that comes out of anti-Semitism has been successfully implemented in the Holocaust. So even though anti-Semitism is completely unacceptable, it still does not meet the standard. It is nowhere near as unimaginably violent as genocide. Okay? Because the entire point is that anti-Semitism could lead to genocide as it has once before. So in the process of doing a genocide, constantly fucking crying about anti-Semitism makes no fucking sense.
Any exchange of violence, despite committing the majority of that violence, Zionists simply portray Arab violence as intrinsically worse than their own, intrinsically more evil. That violence done to Israelis, no matter why it is done or by whom it is done, must always be acknowledged as morally worse than any violence committed by Israel in comparison. You got to do that before any discussion can be had. The performative demand to condemn Hamas.
Will you condemn Hamas? Or will you continue to be silent?
But do you condemn Hamas?
I think I've made my point.
Well, no, you haven't.
Do you condemn what Hamas did?
Do you support Hamas?
Do you specifically condemn Hamas, a designated terrorist organization?
I just noticed that you've not condemned Hamas. Where was the condemnation for Hamas?
Or even some tepid liberal dog shit like extremism on both sides creates the association in people's minds that violence done by or in any way connected to Palestinians is uniquely condemnable, something we must all acknowledge is evil before the conversation may proceed. The moral weight of the violence done.
It's just a way to offer a permission structure to Israel's violence against the Palestinians, both historically and currently happening. And the current version of that, of course, is literal genocide. Genocide that has not actually been able to properly been swept under the rug in the way that like the Nakba was, for example, which was again an ethnic expulsion, ethnic cleansing operation of Palestinians. That created the Israeli state. So in this situation, still at this point, when the overwhelming majority of the public is like aware of what the fuck Israel is doing and find it to be utterly unconscionable, the notion that like, okay, well, you still have to like say what Israel's doing is wrong by first condemning Hamas is ridiculous. Okay? It is ridiculous. And the only reason why that question is still asked is to basically get the interlocutor to say, oh, sure, Israel does have a right. Israel does have a right to attack Gaza. Israel has never had a right to attack Gaza. As a belligerent occupier, it is illegal for Israel to attack Gaza.
To Palestinians, however, is always negotiable. The demand is never put to the Zionists to condemn the IDF as they demand any critic of Israel condemn Hamas, despite the overwhelming disparity in death tolls between the two groups. Israeli violence is thereby legitimated and whitewashed through their comparative lack of performative moral outrage leveled against them. One side is evil for using violence. The other side uses violence, much more violence, in fact, because it's just how things are. They got to defend themselves. This is a particularly handy tool to gain support in the West, where we've been primed to associate Muslims in the Middle East with violent acts of terror to justify decades of illegal wars. This is just yet another illegal war to throw on the pile. Now, let me be extremely clear here, because there are people who are going to make it their business to misinterpret what I'm saying, and nothing I'm saying is going to stop them, but I don't want to make it easy for them. And at least one of those people might be Ethan Klein, who's a little bitch and should sue me. Try it, bitch. Ethan Klein's not going to sue me. I'm not a woman. I am not saying, nor do I believe, that we should make excuses for terrorism, or that the October 7th attacks or any other violent act.
Why doesn't Hamas step down and rebrand? I understand they shouldn't have to, but optics are important. It would deprive Israel of its biggest talking point. Hamas is new. It's a relatively new formation of Palestinian resistance. Before Hamas, it was the PLO. Many of you are too young to even know what that is, or maybe you learned about it recently. So it doesn't matter. Before Hamas was the PLO. Okay? Hamas is the rebrand. That is the rebrand. And I'm sure that there will be another rebrand in the future. It's just whatever that rebrand is, it will turn into the new evil being. They said the exact same shit about the PLO that they're saying about Hamas right now. You understand? Why won't the IRA rebrand? Well, they also branched off. Why won't the ANC rebrand? Why won't the FLN rebrand? It's just, this is an irrelevant question. It's a completely irrelevant question. That's why I hate that, bruh, you're so lame and obnoxious. What? What the fuck? What the hell? Yeah, they've said the exact same thing about the PLO, about the PFLP, about the DFLP, about Islamic Jihad, about every single Palestinian resistance organization that has come into existence, because the goal ultimately is to deny Palestinians their sovereignty and to deny Palestinians their right to exist, to resist against the Israeli occupation, and to resist against the exist and to resist against the Israeli occupation. Comparing the ANC and Hamas, a very effective argument to those who don't understand resistance. I mean, I don't know if you're saying that as a negative, because some people have claimed that my comparison between the ANC and Hamas is actually like completely unacceptable. I mean, their function is not dissimilar to one another at all. It's just, actively fighting against a settler colonial entity engaging in an apartheid. In any case, the question of rebrand is silly, especially because the genocide is still going on. This is why why don't you condemn Hamas? You love Hamas type of arguments are idiotic, and I do my very best to just like fucking cast them aside because it's irrelevant. It is completely irrelevant. Like, I don't have to love Hamas, okay, to recognize that genocide is wrong. I don't care about the members of Hamas and their political ambitions or what their goals are. I'm looking at the situation from the perspective of an ongoing 80-year settler colonial occupation built around Jewish supremacy and extermination of all non-Jews in the region for a greater Israeli project, which is unfolding in front of our eyes. It does not matter what my opinion or your opinion is on Hamas, even a little bit, okay? That's it. It's straightforward victim blaming.
Action by or in support of Palestinians were good things or permissible or necessary or whatever the fuck it might be convenient for people to pretend I am saying. I'm saying specifically that the demand that these things be condemned before the conversation may proceed is a framing device used to portray Palestinians as uniquely violent, uniquely worthy of condemnation. One does not ordinarily need to condemn terrorist attacks. It is generally understood that terrorism, by and large,
my favorite response to condemning Hamas is I condemn Hamas exactly as much as you condemn Israel for war crimes. No, I don't think that's appropriate, because one party here is the overwhelmingly violent party and is responsible for any kind of resistance, any kind of militant resistance against it. And that party is Israel. That's why I say over and over and over again, and I've reiterated this position a million times over, which really pisses off Zionists, which really, really pisses off people. When I actively will say, and I retweeted this before, there's no symmetry between Hamas and Israel, of course. What is it? It's like one of my favorite things that I've tweeted ever. There's no comparison between Israel and Hamas. One is a militant resistance comprised of orphan soldiers born into a 77-year occupation. The other is an ethno-religious supremacist apartheid state with nukes doing a genocide backed by the USA. Israel is a belligerent occupier, does not have a right to defend itself by bombing Gaza. Palestinians, on the other hand, have a legal right to defend themselves against Israel's genocide. Since the media tide is shifting after 19 months, ask yourself why no one ever mentions this. This is a 100% objectively correct statement. It's one of those statements where it's like, you can get mad. You can call me a fucking terrorist all day. You can be like, oh, you love Hamas. You want to hug and kiss Hamas. You are HasanAbi. But you can't call me a liar. No one ever chooses to try and undermine this. No one ever chooses to attack this argument, because it is not an argument you can attack. You can only simply say, you're evil, you're immoral, you love terrorism, you want, you fantasize, insert fucking fantastical hallucinations about anti-Semitism here. Okay? That's it. I do not care about what the Hamas's like domestic opinions are. And this is precisely the reason why, as I've shown you before, how many buzzwords can you fit in one post? What a piece of shit. Nazi hunters, stay mad. Israel's the greatest act of Jewish resistance the world has ever seen. So why did they kill those innocent civilians at the music festival? You're such a twat. It's painful to read your nonsense. How much were you paid to say that? Hasan writes his own history. Nothing. Nothing. No retort, no retaliation, nothing. At this point, as a Palestinian, when I'm asked if I condemn Hamas, I say, so you think Palestinians are human? Do you think it would be a tragedy if violence was done to me because it forces them to either admit they don't want to answer or show their racism openly? Doesn't matter. The American government and the American society as a whole during World War II was segregationist, homophobic, misogynistic. So much violence was taking place domestically in the United States of America in the 30s and the 40s alike. And yet, we fucking stand proudly with Easy Company, and we salute them for fighting against the Nazi scourge. Whatever inferences you might have, you can, use that against any number of different resistance groups that have chosen to militarily fight back and resist against Israel and its unlimited amounts of violence against all non-Jewish people in the region.
Bad thing. We don't like it, do we, folks? It's tautological, because if you like something, you don't refer to it as terrorism. But by demanding that you condemn Hamas or condemn the October 7th attacks or whatever the fuck as a response to any criticism of the far more pervasive violence that Israel commits, the seed is planted in your mind that by criticizing Israeli violence, you are somehow tacitly endorsing any violence done to Israelis. That there exists some nebulous group of people who would balk at the concept of condemning a terrorist attack. That one can safely assume that anyone defending the right of Palestinian self-determination is only doing so because they're in league with this nefarious secret group of terrorism likers. You look so suspicious when you say not to ethnically cleanse these guys. It's giving terrorist. It's jihad coded, sweetie. And again, it seems like a fair enough concession, doesn't it? The October 7th attacks were horrible. They're worth condemning. Anytime people are murdered, it is generally worth condemning. But of course, in doing so, one necessarily glosses over the context of 70 years of violent occupation and ethnic cleansing, which made this tragedy inevitable. One necessarily privileges the lives lost in the October 7th attack over the tens of thousands of Palestinian lives lost after the fact. You cannot give a soundbite which places this attack in a historical context, and that is what they're counting on. But of course, when you condemn Israeli violence, you're inviting counter-violence. By describing their actions, you invite reprisal for those actions. It's the critics of Israel who bear responsibility for any anger people feel towards Israel or anything Israel's done. You're making room, friend.
Not worth condemning. This dumb fuck isn't in a position to do so. You don't understand the point he's making. The point he's making is that as far as like any civilian being killed, that is a condemnable action. It makes sense, okay? But in the grander context, you have to look at the much larger systematic forms of violence that made these otherwise condemnable actions inevitable. What do you mean? He is making a correct point there. He's literally saying, like, it's bad, but what do you fucking expect? And if you think that's bad, wait till you get a load of what Israel has been doing before October 7 and what Israel has done after October 7. That's it.
Anti-Semites who might cynically use your principled objections to justify their prejudices. And yes, they might. They might do
creators as they, them. Oh, my bad.
that. That's a legitimate concern. Boy, it's a good thing that there's no way to be prejudiced against Muslims, or else we might have to be likewise measured in our critique of Palestinian violence. Isn't it funny how concern for bad faith racists misinterpreting your criticisms...
Actually, it's all pronouns? Oh, classic. Classic case of chat.
...only seems to apply to one side of this conflict between two racialized minority groups? And once again, you're put in this position. Once again, you either accept their framing and present any Palestinian violence as wholly unprovoked, emerging from nowhere and nothing, evidence of a deep, primordial evil in the Palestinian national character, which must be condemned, but also, crucially, does not exist. Or you give the appearance of defending the indefensible, quibbling on the fine details of terrorism, making excuses for mass murder, which they'll no doubt accuse me of doing either way, so I don't know why I'm bothering to state my position more clearly. Like I say, let me be clear so often in these videos, and it doesn't
Also, the only thing he wants is for people to not police their pronouns. That's so funny.
matter. There's no clarifying a position for someone that is motivated to misinterpret it. Okay, all right, so I'm a bit all over the map right now. My point is, when discussing the occupation and genocide in Palestine, we should remain focused rhetorically on the power imbalance between the Israeli occupiers and indigenous Palestinian population. We should not be led into discussions that Zionists have carefully framed to portray Israel as the perpetual victim of unmotivated hostilities and Palestinians as monsters. To quote 100 Years of War on Palestine, which I mentioned at the beginning, inspired this video, "It is the issue of inequality that is the most promising for expanding the understanding of the reality in Palestine. It is also the most important, since inequality was essential to the creation of a Jewish state in an overwhelmingly Arab land, and is vital to maintaining that state's dominance. Inequality is so crucial, not only because it is anathema to the egalitarian democratic societies that the Zionist project has primarily relied on for its support, but because equality of rights is key to a just, lasting resolution of the entire problem. Within Israel, certain important rights are reserved exclusively for Jewish citizens and denied to the 20% of citizens who are Palestinian. Of course, the 5 million Palestinians living under an Israeli military regime in the occupied territories have no rights at all, while the 500,000+ Israeli colonists there enjoy full rights. This systemic ethnic discrimination was always a central facet of Zionism, which by definition aimed to create a Jewish society and polity with exclusive national rights in a land with an Arab majority. Even as Israel's 1948 Declaration of Independence proclaimed complete equality of social and political rights to all its inhabitants irrespective of religion, race, or sex, dozens of crucial laws based on inequality of rights were implemented in the ensuing years. These severely restricted or totally banned Arab access to land and to residency in all Jewish communities, formalized the seizure of private and collective property of non-Jews, and prevented most indigenous Palestinians who were made into refugees from returning to their homes while giving...
Like, Israel straight up uses a socialist principle of land ownership centralized in the hands of the state in an effort to destroy Palestinian existence. It's so fucked. Another great example of how national socialism, Nazism, ends up focusing on the former rather than the latter. Nationalism is always a higher degree of importance. And socialism, as long as you abide by it, is simply a means to an end. It's not a real thing.
Giving citizenship rights to Jewish immigrants and limited access to many other benefits. If this has got you all fired up and you're looking for some way to help, I've included links in the description to a variety of charities doing aid work for Gaza. I know that times are tough right now, but, you know, the links are there. I think your money would go a long way.
Good video. Thank you for watching that. You're welcome. You guys really want me to watch the Toss Line video. I'm glad I did.